Hello, and welcome to HTM on the Line, the podcast that is for HTM by HTM. I'm your host, Bryant Hawkins Sr. My special guest today is Professor James Linton, who is the professor and program coordinator of biomedical engineering at St. Clair College in Ontario, Canada. Who knew a chance encounter could lead to a fulfilling career? That's the incredible journey our guest, Professor James, shares with us. He stumbled upon the healthcare technology management industry while browsing through university options and was instantly hooked. His career took him through various biomedical companies, a stint creating a central equipment depot, and finally a rewarding role teaching the subject he loves at a local college. James and I delve into the high-stress, high-stakes world of biomedical equipment technicians whose vital work can mean the difference between life and death. James also shares advice for the young HTM professionals. Without further ado, let's jump into this week's episode with Professor James Linton. James, welcome to HTM on the Line. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here and have an excuse to be in the air conditioning.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think the last time I saw you was at Amy in Long Beach, California. How you been since then?
Been good. Just, a little bit, I'd love to say colder up here in Canada, but we're just as hot up here as we were down there. So, things are good. I'm on my summer break and, loving life.
I'm glad our schedules were finally able to line up and we can do this podcast. But before we get started, could you please tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do? That way, get a little history on you.
No worries. So I'm from Canada. I'm up in Ontario, Canada. Right now I'm in Windsor, Ontario, but I've lived all over. I got into Biomed way back when bench tech was pretty much the only thing back in 03 to 06, somewhere in there. I don't want to give it away because, gentleman never tells his age. But I can say that I am one of those people actually that didn't know what Biomed was. Like I fell into it. I remember I was in the hospital during SARS, which was really big up here in Canada, especially being near Toronto. And I was in the hospital for 3 months and I came out and I was too late to apply to universities. And so I was going through all the books trying to figure out what to apply to. And I applied to, nursing, nuclear med, and biomed. And I ended up taking Biomed and I showed up and they said, here's your schedule. You got electronics and this and that. I'm like, what do you mean I got electronics? I got a lab coat. Like, I didn't even know what Biomed was. So anyway, I fell in love with it, ended up sticking with Biomed purely by chance. Once I finished up in that, myself and another Biomed that graduated, I think we were out of it for about 3 days. And I gave this guy a call and I said, hey man, you got a job yet? He says, nope. I said, you still got some of your student loan? Yep. And I said, okay, I'm going to call you back in 3 minutes. Called him back 3 minutes later, and we were booked on a flight. And the two of us that Saturday were sitting in Manchester, England. We did a Euro trip for about 2 months and came back, started working, did my bachelor's while I worked, then did my master's while I was working. Did a bunch of school because I figured why not get it done. And, I figured getting back to school when you're older is always so much harder. So luckily, young me was a lot smarter and did that. In the meantime, I was working for McKesson, doing field service rep work for a number of years. That was sort of my entry into Biomed outside of contract jobs. Once I left there, I ended up at a local hospital, which was my hometown hospital, Woodstock, and they had never had a Biomed for more than 1 day a week. And they said, hey, we want to hire you. And so, quick story there, I went there to this interview and they said, we have this idea for Biomed and we want a central equipment depot. And, I'm hungry for this job. It's my hometown. I can't wait to do it and be the first one. And I'm sitting in front of the COO and the CNO. And they said, so here's the footprint. Do you have any idea what a central equipment depot is? And I said, well, I'm not 100% sure what you're looking for, but here's what I would do as a central equipment depot. And I said, we're going to have all the IV pumps flow through there and vital sign monitors, any spare equipment, get rid of hoarding, blah, blah, blah. And I threw it at the wall to see if it would stick. And at the end of that, the CNO stood up, shook my hand and said, "That's perfect." I said, "What do you mean that's perfect? Is that what you guys wanted?" And he said, "James, we planned this hospital over 10 years ago. We just got funding. And in the plans for this, what we're building has a central equipment depot, but no one wrote down what that's supposed to be. And we like your idea." So I was able to go to my hometown, build a whole new Biomed department, a whole new central equipment depot. 6 months later, we moved to a brand new facility. It was great. Then from there, I left there, headed to Canadian Blood Services, which is in Canada, we only have 2 blood banks. We've got one in Quebec, one of our provinces, and then Canadian Blood Services takes care of the rest. And so I started there as a national operations manager, became a national director of equipment services, traveled. Oh God, the joke was that the Air Canada Lounge was my office because I was gone 3 out of every 4 months. So, I had 2 young kids and things just started getting to that point where I said, I can't miss my kids growing up. So I got this job offer down here at St. Clair College teaching biomeds. And I had done some teaching on the side before for another college, actually the one that I went to. And I said, you know what, it's a pay cut, but I'm going to get to influence the next generation of biomeds. And let's be honest, I'm going to have my summers off and every holiday there is and see my kids. So, I did that about 4.5, 5 years ago and haven't looked back. I'm loving it.
Wow, man, that's a ride. You've touched a number of areas in the HTM industry, which is awesome. That gives you a lot of background you could share with the children, with the kids you're teaching. Now,
oh yeah, and I got to apologize. I always call them kids, but there's a lot of people that come into my program that are in their 30s, 40s. I had someone in their 60s just graduate this year, so I call them kids because they're in school and they're learning. But some of them are older than me.
You're absolutely right. Because when I took Biomed, I was the baby in the class, and the classes were full of people that had jobs. So most of my classes was at night, which was very challenging for a 19-year-old because everybody else was going to school in the daytime, but I had to go at night because that's the only time they was able to get students because everybody was older and worked at the moment.
And I think I figured out what it is. And it's the fact that when you're young, if you're like I was, you want to chase money and you wanted the fun job. People want to be a cop or they want to be a firefighter. Or they want to fly a plane, or something like that, or they're want to get into management. And then later in life, people start to realize, oh my God, like if I could only have a job where I got to do things with my hands, I could help my community, I could have a steady 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, make good money and have a pension. And then they discover Biomed because really, what teacher, what high school or elementary school or middle school is really telling the kids about Biomed, right? It's few and far between. So I found whenever I talk to high school guidance counselors, they always tell me the same thing. I wish I knew about this for my kid because people just don't know about this thing. So I think later in life, when we start to value things like a pension and the hours you work and, working in environments that are climate controlled without a lot of heavy lifting, we have a lot of benefits in this field that most new graduates and most young people may not realize the value of it. Personally, if you offer me a job that's 7 to 3 versus one that's, say, 12 to 8, that's like making an extra $10,000, $20,000 just in quality of life. I think as we get older, people start to realize that.
Absolutely, James. I can concur with you on the awareness of this industry because every school I go to, crickets when I ask someone, have you ever heard of Biomed? Nobody. And it's amazing that it's 2023 and you still have predominantly everyone I know just know I work in the hospital, but they actually do not know, except for, of course, my kids because they grew up in it. But as far as the regular Joe on the street, clueless. And What about your kids that's taking biomed? Did they know about this, or they just came into the class just because it sounded cool?
I mean, I expected when COVID hit and there was, this big, massive, we need ventilators, we need all these things. Oh my God. I thought we were going to see a surge of people coming into our industry, and that didn't happen. Instead, the people in the industry had to stand up, and, some people have been standing on their heads for years since, working, double, triple overtime. So, I mean, it's been interesting. But yeah, the students that I have, I usually ask them in my intro class, because I run the intro Biomed and I run their last Biomed equipment class, because I like to see the whole, beginning to end. Kind of a selfish thing, but I like to see that. And, I find that a lot of them, it's their parents told them about this job, or they know someone who's in the profession. Very rarely do I get someone who just, I looked it up and think it looks awesome. It's always someone knows someone who does this, and then a parent or the kid goes, wow, that sounds like a great idea. What I've been finding is I also get a few people that go into nursing and paramedics that will say, you know what, I've decided that I don't want to deal with people, or I don't want to deal with blood or things like this. And Biomed allows me to give back and to be part of healthcare without being that part of healthcare. But yeah, it's rare that we get people coming in who just go, yeah, Biomed, I saw it in a book, or I saw it online and thought it was great. It's almost always that we heard something.
Yeah, exactly. That's the reason for this podcast, honestly, is to just bring awareness to it, and hopefully it becomes something as popular as a nurse or a doctor or a policeman or a fireman. Because it's like you mentioned before, it's an excellent field where it doesn't break your back. You're inside, you're not in the heat, and you pretty much like you have your own business, because everyone has their own jobs to do. So it's a great field if anyone just took the time to know about it, I guess. Now,
absolutely, it's phenomenal. It's actually, I'll sort of plug this. I was talking with, is it Chase?
Chase. Chase Torres.
Beard Biomed. He wrote Ollie the Biomed kids book, and I bought a copy before the last name exchange for my kids. And now it's aimed at kids a little bit younger than mine. I'd say it's aimed at kids probably grade 2, grade 1, somewhere in there. But I immediately thought, what a great idea to write a book for kids at such a young age. At the age of grade 2 and grade 3, people are always saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we're sort of forcing that down kids. And all they see are books about firefighters and nurses and, military and all these things. Wouldn't it be great to have one about Biomed that we could explain, here's what they do? And so I bought that book for my kids, and I actually got a hold of the Bearded Biomed, and I said, hey, how much for a couple of copies? I said, in my local area, we have 87 elementary schools, and, be it whatever belief or whatever system they are, there's 87. And so I talked to him, and I talked to MedWrench, and I'm trying to work on getting some donations and getting things together, because I want to get a copy of that book in each of those 87 schools, because I think that our field just needs to be out there. If we can put that into a kid's head in grade 3, grade 4, grade 2, that this is a legit profession, why not? So I think while he wrote this as a nice book for his child and whatnot, I think it could be a great asset. So that's one of the things I've been working on this summer, is trying to get a couple copies of that to send out.
Yes, absolutely. I got it. I have his book also in my office. I work at a children's hospital, and I share it with individuals likewise. Because one time I was saying this as probably a joke, but I was wishing if I was in Hollywood and if I could, how they have Superman, I wish they could have like a biomed tech. He can be a biomed tech by day, Superman by night. And he could be dating the nurse instead of Lois Lane. He could be a nurse, and you can put his daytime job in the movie as a regular biomed tech instead of a newspaper reporter. I think that would gravitate the kids. Who could I get to write that movie?
Well, it reminds me of one of my favorite movies. way back when was called Thank You for Smoking. And anyway, the whole movie revolves around this guy who works for Big Tobacco, and he has to, fight off healthcare and whatnot because obviously causes cancer and whatnot. But he's trying to make it cool again because they want kids to smoke. They want to get that group. Now, again, that's wrong. We don't want that. But what he does is he goes to the movie industry and he starts paying the movie industry executives and producers so that whenever your character is on screen, if it's a cool character, put a cigarette in their hand, right? Now, by that same tone, wouldn't it be nice if now and then some of these TV characters, like you said, be it Superman or anything like that, if their daytime job was being a biomed, right? Get one of those, get biomed, get something that it's not the job that everyone sees out there. So kids know, and so people know that we exist. It's, I know that was a bit of a long circle to get there, but the idea of getting something in Hollywood where there's someone who's a biomed, I mean, as a biomed myself and you being one, I'm sure you've watched TV shows where you're like, oh my God, the biomeds would take care of this. Or, was it in the A-Team movie that came out a couple of years back? They used a defib to jump a car. Like, that's not how this works. Or my favorite is when they use a defib on someone who's flatlining and you're like, that's not how this works. Or I watched one the other day with my wife where there was a cybersecurity and they hacked a whole hospital. The whole hospital was locked down. And here comes this one lady who works in IT and she's going to take care of it.
Right.
I'm like, well, hold on a second. If they've shut down all the medical equipment, I'm pretty sure, we'd be a part of that. But nope, it was just one single IT person who fixed every single medical device. It's like, that hurts when it comes to trying to get people into our industry, right?
Even if the movie, like you have Chicago PD, Chicago Med, they can have an episode of Chicago Med where they're in the ER. Patient comes in critical, the equipment fails. Get Biomed on the phone. Some guy come in there from Biomed, fix the equipment right quick, get back into the episode. I think someone would say, wow, who is the Biomed guy? Because they do it for X-ray. They call X-ray in. They call physical therapy in. But you never hear, get Biomed in here immediately. I mean, I think that.
Well, one of the stories I always tell at open houses, and I always tell when I've got a group of students, or I tell it again when I have my first year students, is that when I worked at Woodstock Hospital, I had this new hire. He graduated. He did a month of placement at another hospital. Then I hired him because I could see there was like this it factor to this guy. And it's his first day, so he goes, does all his paperwork. About 10 in the morning, I said, hey, let me buy you coffee. So we head to Tim Hortons. We get a coffee just in the cafeteria there. And my phone goes off, and it's the OR. And there's an anesthesia machine that's down. And we got a patient that's under right now. And I'm told, look, we got about 5-6 minutes before this patient comes to, and their chest has been popped. And I'm like, oh, well, this is kind of a problem. Hey, Derek, come with me. We hop in the elevator. We go up there, and he's freaking out. This is his first day, and we're going to a live OR where a patient may die in the next couple minutes. I get in there. We take care of it in maybe 2-3 minutes tops. You'll be shocked to learn that it was just loose cabling, right? Of course. And walk out of there, no problem. We go back, have the coffee, and this guy looks and he goes, oh my God, like how? Does that happen every day? I said, no, that might happen once in your career. That might happen once a year. But yes, that type of stuff does happen. And I like to tell that to all these new people to let them know that guy on his first day, just looking at cords, helps save someone's life, right? And there is some stress in this job, and you got to be able to deal with it. Because if you can't deal with stress, this might not be for you either. So it's, that was that guy's first day. And I can tell you that he went on to, when I left that job, he became the manager, went and managed another Biomed shop, and then became a national manager at an OEM after that. So he stuck with it. And his first day was an OR open chest situation.
Wow. Yes. That's one of the great things about this industry and one of the scary things about this industry. You don't know what you're going to walk into each day you come to work. Every day Absolutely. It's different. And that's great because sometimes you can get bored with the same thing day in, day out. But with this industry, you don't know. You find out when you get there. You know about the PMs, of course, but any type of service call.
And it also tells you one of the coolest things about this industry is that when you get out of school, right? Let's say I sent you at your hospital a brand new Biomed. What are they going to work on that first week? I'm guessing IV pumps, right? IV pumps sound about right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now, that student might work on, say, 4 IV pumps that day, right? And they go home. And when they go home, they get to say, I worked on 4 IV pumps that were used on patients to let someone have an extra hour or an extra day with their grandmother, or, help someone finish off their chemo treatment. These 4 IV pumps that are the most basic pieces of equipment are still life-changing and life-saving. And that's on day one. You go talk to someone, I'm going to pick on an industry here. You could talk to someone who's, say, a carpenter, and nothing against carpenters, very skilled people. Carpenter goes out, they've been in the industry 30 years. They come home, they go, I made an amazing kitchen today. Yeah, you did. But how does that satisfaction compare to I, as a day one Biomed, helped save 4 lives today?
Absolutely, man. And working in a children's hospital, you see the kids, they are happy, they're smiling, and they're really sick. But then you look up at the parent can't hide it too well. So they're stressed. Yeah. And just to know that we're working on equipment that's making that kid hopefully get better to where he can go home, it's a privilege. Honestly, I treat it as a privilege to be able to be in the position to do what we do. And I constantly tell my team that I said, man, we're in a life-saving work. And
I tell all my students, when you go to a hospital, if you're OEM or if you're in-house, doesn't matter. You go to that hospital and you walk around. You walk around to help people, but you also walk around and you just look in rooms and see the people you're impacting, because that's worth something too, right? Like, let's face it, people who get into Biomed are usually very, very skilled, very good people, right? I say that as I pump myself up a bit there. Could they go make more money somewhere else? There's a good chance. But would the satisfaction be the same? I don't think so.
No.
That there's a lot to be said for it. A nurse saves someone's life. They get to see it. They get to be part of it. For us, sometimes we're in the shop just pumping out IV pumps, so we don't get to see all that stuff. So I think it's really important that biomeds go around and actually see the impact we're having.
That definitely helps them. And a lot of times they'll say the nurse is so mean, and I'll tell them, well, that nurse is dealing with something that's probably extremely stressful, and she don't have room for error. So if she's calling you with an issue, it's not you personally. It's just an event she's in the middle of. So you can't have your heart on your sleeve. You have to be very thick-skinned in this industry also.
Yeah, when it comes to nurses and doctors, I think of that relationship kind of like a marriage, in that, you're both doing something together to make this patient better. Absolutely. But also, I'm going to disagree with the nurse sometimes. I'm going to think a nurse or a doctor is a jerk sometimes, but I'm not going to say that in front of a patient. To that patient, I'm going to say, you are so lucky. You are so blessed to have this nurse. She is the best. She is wonderful. And if I have a concern with that nurse, I go behind closed doors and I talk to them. Just like in a good marriage, right? You don't want to go out with your friends and talk trash about your wife. But if you have something you need to say, you say it at the appropriate time without that audience. Because, one off-the-cuff remark in front of a patient or in front of a manager or anything like that is a biomed. And you have tainted that person's view of your entire hospital, of your entire system.
Yes, and that will probably mean that Biomed won't be there anymore. But
sadly to say,
but
if they're going to cut one, it's probably us.
But let me ask you this question, man. How is the Biomed culture in Canada? I know it's right close to America, but is there a huge need for technicians over there?
It's everyone knows everyone. We're not as big as the US. We're definitely a lot smaller because we're publicly funded. So we got to run very lean in most cases. But that being said, if someone down the road quits their job as biomed, I probably know who's going into it, and I probably know where that person got a job. It's like a musical chairs almost. We always know people. I'll have students tell me, oh, I'm looking for a job in, say, Nova Scotia. Okay, well, I've got 2 or 3 contacts out there. Let me see what they got. Now, a year ago, I would have said, you know what, it's going to take 3 to 6 months to get a job for any of my students. If they want to stay in Canada, that is, 3 to 6 months, and you're going to have to move. Now, I stand by the you're going to have to move. But this year, I graduated 25 students, and anyone who wanted a job and was willing to move got a job. Anyone who wanted to go on to further education is. The only ones that get stuck are the ones that say, look, I live in a town of probably 250,000 here in Windsor. I don't want to move. Well, yeah, there's only so many jobs, right? Now, that being said, this year I probably had, I'd say, 10 different employers call me since graduation time begging for students. So Canada is starting to see what's happened in the US. We're starting to see that creep of demand, which is interesting because here in Canada, we graduate, according to the numbers from Amy that I heard, I believe the US graduates about 500 biomeds a year, and Canada graduates about 250, but we're 1/10 the population.
Wow.
In Ontario, we have 3 biomed colleges. We used to graduate about, let's say, 30, 60, about 100 to 150 in Ontario every year. Nowadays, that number has dropped. I'd say we probably graduate, about 50, 60 for the province of Ontario. Now, is that enough for Ontario? Absolutely. But it's starting to get really tight, and other provinces are in need. I had Regina Hospital call me and tell me they needed 8 biomeds. Like there's no program out there. They just need people. It's, we're starting to turn that way, but at the same time, being in Windsor, I'm 10, 15 minutes from Ford Field in Detroit. We have the US right there. On the street I live, we have multiple nurses who work in the States because, they need nurses just like we do. The US pays more, and so they'll get a TN visa and go work over there. So what we tell our students is, look, if you want to stay local, your best chance is to apply in Michigan, apply in Detroit, apply to the States and get a TN visa. It's the exact same visa that nurses get, and you guys can get it because my students come out with an associate's degree. So it's, the demand is definitely there. So whereas it used to be 3 to 6 months to find a job, now my students are finding them within, I'd say, 2 to 3 months.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it is in New Orleans. They would have to move to get work. There's not many available biomed jobs in the city, but if they was to go probably to Texas or Florida, there's work. But like you said, a lot of kids do not want to leave. They want to stay local. And unfortunately, you run into that speed bump. Will something come up probably in the next few months? Probably. But, it's all about what you want to do when you graduate.
And, I think today's economic situation that we find ourselves in, Canada and US is pretty similar in that it's getting to be too expensive for these students to move across the country and, buy a place to live and that sort of thing. It's getting to be too much. So some of them, especially around here, housing has gone crazy. And some people, they're planning to live with their parents until they're 40. It's just the only way they can afford to save up.
Hey, man, don't say 40, man. I mean, say 30.
Hey, trust me, I was out of my house the minute I was able to. Okay. That was my generation, was get out.
Yeah.
And now I looked at my youngest daughter, she's 8, and she told me out of nowhere one day, you can live in the basement when me and my husband move in here. Bed part. He says, yeah, when I get a husband, he's going to move in here and we're going to have kids and you can live in the basement. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, why am I in my home basement? I'm a little confused here. So it's I think that sort of mentality is starting to come back. There was a lot of years where it was, you're 18, get out. I think nowadays we're sort of changing to that stick around, try and get help from your parents thing. So kids are scared to move. Why move to Texas if I can stay in New Orleans, work a different job that's not biomed, even though I went to school for it, but I get free rent and free food, and my friends are here.
James, let's switch it up a little bit. All right. You
Yeah.
have a student and they just finished, and as you just mentioned, they couldn't find a job. So what would you tell him to keep that kid, student, motivated or encouraged? What would you tell them?
If I had a student that I'd first have to ask, why haven't you found a job? Are you willing to move? What's slowing you down? What is causing you to not want to take that leap? I actually had this with a student recently who reached out to me. He graduated 2 years ago, has been living in Windsor, and he reached out and said, "James, I'm ready. I'm ready to get a biomed job." And I said, "Okay, well, are you willing to move now?" "Yep." I said, "What's been going on?" And he said, my father passed and all these other things happened. And I said, "Okay, well, you want to get back into it. You're ready for it." And I remember this kid graduating. He was a nice guy. He was always late to class. And I knew some personal things were going on. Now he's told me. And so I understand him better. And I said, "Well, let me make a call." And so I made a call to Regina Hospital, and I said, "Hey, are you still looking?" And I got an email back from them because I had called but left a voicemail. And I said, "Yeah, we're still looking." So I passed this guy the information, and maybe 3 days later, he had emailed me saying, "Will you be my reference?" And I was talking to them within maybe a half hour of getting that email from him. So when a student doesn't want to, or when a student isn't sure what to do and can't find a job, what I usually say is, look, what's holding you back? If you're being held back from moving, that's got to be what it is. That's usually what holds people back from getting a job. And if that's not it, then I'll say, look, call the hospital, call these people. I've applied to, I hear this all the time, I've applied to 20 jobs and I haven't heard back. Call, talk to the Biomed, show that initiative. Just call them up and say, "Hey, can I speak to Biomed?" Talk to the manager and say, "Look, I'm really interested in working for you guys. I love the work you do in the community. Could I come even just do a tour? I'm so interested." Because I think doing something like that is going to set them apart from everyone else as well. It shows the manager and the biomeds that, look, this kid is serious about this. They're not just a fly-by-night, follow the money, where will I get an extra dollar type of person. And so, yeah, if they can't find a job, that's usually a go-to as well. Reach out. Make the phone call, drop in.
That's a true statement. I can attest to that, man. I was between jobs, and I called the Biomed department, like you mentioned. And the guy told me, "I don't have anything here, but I know somebody who's looking." And he gave me the guy's phone number. I was with that company for 17 years. So it's absolutely true.
That's just it. We're such a small community. Yes. If I'm not hiring, I probably know someone who is.
Yes, you have to call. You have to not wait to what you find in the news. Well, online now. It used to be newspapers when I was young. But, you have to go out there and take the initiative. I used to volunteer before I graduated. I was going to the Biomed department, volunteering before my internship even came up, trying to get myself out there. You have to take those extra steps and invest in yourself, because if you don't, nobody else will. So that's a true statement. Call. I hate just sitting back applying. Call, because if you call somebody, like you said, they either know an OEM looking for someone. There's somebody looking for someone. They just don't have it posted yet. So,
well, even if it is a job that's posted, if I had a job posted, say when I was with Blood Services, and I've got, say 20 resumes, and I'm looking at 4 of them thinking, I'll interview all 4, see where we're at. If one of them were to call me and say, "Hey, sir, just wanted to know where this is at, if I could ever come by for a tour," if they showed that initiative, they'd go from the no pile to the maybe pile. And if they're in the maybe pile, they're probably my top candidate because you showed that initiative. Whereas everyone else just kind of, let's face it, in a chat GPT type of world, I can apply to 100 jobs with customized cover letters within a couple hours, right?
Yes.
It's not like the old days. So just showing a little bit of that, let alone what's one of the main skills that biomeds today need that maybe the past they didn't. It's people skills. It's being able to talk,
Preach.
being able to engage. And so I always tell my students, one of the things I looked for when I hired was, could I have a coffee with this person? So if you're looking for work, call a hospital, offer to buy them a coffee. And if you can sit there and hold a conversation with them, maybe that is a place you want to work. Or maybe you find out during your tour and this coffee that this place is not what I thought it was. Because an interview is a two-way street, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it's so challenging, James, because we probably don't have an issue with communicating, but a lot of biomeds are introverts. I mean, it's just amazing how people that repair
equipment. Let me give you a quick story.
All right, go ahead.
One of my introduction to biomed classes, right? Biomed foundations, I think we call it now. One of them is, I want you to call a biomed, contact a biomed, right? And ask them these 30 questions telling you what a day in the life is like. And I always tell them, look, don't call the local hospital. Don't call Windsor Regional. I can't have 60 of you calling them, right? And so, a week goes by, the deadline's coming up, and I get a call, and it's the director of Biomed, and she's all laughs, and she says, "Well, I got a couple phone calls. It must be that time." I said, "Yep, sorry about that. I told them not to call you." She says, "No, we got about 10 calls. That's not bad." And I'm like, "Oh, no, that is bad." And she says, "Well, no, but the reason I'm calling you is we wouldn't mind answering 10 people. The problem is that 9 of those people had their parents call us to do the interview for them." I mean, as an educator, I was flabbergasted. I had my students come in and I tore them a strip. I said, I claimed I knew who they were, but I couldn't prove anything. So I just said to the whole class, if this is you, this is not your industry. You need to be able to make a phone call. Like you got to be able to do this sort of thing. And I think COVID, I'm going to blame, as well as just this current generation. It's not a thing as much, right? I remember being a kid, you want to play Nintendo with a friend, they come and sit on your couch, right?
Yes, sir.
Now you're playing with 30 kids from across the globe that you'll never actually talk to.
See,
so there's definitely something missing, and there's a lot of anxiety around just calling a hospital and saying, "Hey, what does Biomed do?"
I have a funny story for you. Not trying to cut you off. But you mentioned about the biomed tech, reaching out to. Well, my son, he's a biomed tech, and he came in on one day and said, "Dad," he's asking me a bunch of questions, and I'm all excited. Man, we having shop talk at the house. And then I asked him, I said, "Man, why you asking me all these questions?" He said, "Well, I got a homework assignment, and I was supposed to look it up, but since you're here," I said, "Oh, man, that's for you. He's supposed to call the manufacturer. He's supposed to download a service manual, but he was just asking me." And so I think it's just these young generation always trying to find the easy way, man. And
speaking of my youngest, right, she was just finished grade 2, and one of her assignments was, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And, typical kid goes, "I want to be a veterinarian." And so I thought, you know what, we could Google this, or do you want to go see one? And she goes, "Yeah, that sounds great," right? She's still got that kid, and I can't wait. And I just called a local vet. I said, "Hey, this is my daughter. It's her assignment. Would you mind if we came in?" "Not a problem. When would you like to come in?" Brought my 2 daughters with me. They gave us a tour, showed us the equipment, showed us the animals, answered questions. The vet looked at her, and I asked the vet, "When did you know what you wanted to be?" And she says, "Grade 2. And my daughter looks at me right then and says, "Yep, I'm going to be a vet. She told me that when I'm 15, I can come and work here." And I'm like, you know what? She may stick with that, right? But I wanted to really ingrain that. We don't have to Google everything. Let's go talk to someone. Let's go see it.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Like it's not the same to just Google it.
But James, what I can tell you, man, that what you're doing for the HTM industry is commendable. And I appreciate your efforts and I applaud you. But I have to ask you also, is there any other things you're doing in the industry to make sure things go to a level where it can improve? Any volunteer services you're doing?
Yeah. So volunteer sometimes. um, so one thing that I do is, we got the 3-year program for the kids, and I've noticed that a lot of HR people now want people with bachelors, which is strange when my students have associates, but whatever. So I worked with our local university and developed a path to a bachelor's that only takes 12 months. And it's all after hours, so they can do it while they're working. And so I did all that. Now I'm teaching in that. I did a bunch of work with VR way back when, and sort of tried to pioneer using that in the classroom. We've got a good Biomed club at my college now that actually you don't have to be a member of, but we encourage the students to be a member of, and they will do extra, bring in people from different companies to teach them things, bring in teachers to upgrade things. They fundraise money to go to things like the AMI Exchange every year so that they can get out there and meet people. I'm trying to raise money right now, or raise not even money, but copies of books for the local elementary schools. Working on trying to contact some OEMs to get sponsors for scholarships for our biomeds, because fun fact, in my college, where we have 40 to 60 new biomeds every year, we have 0 scholarships that are geared towards biomeds. And so it's a battle every year. I'm on that scholarship committee fighting to get my students stuff because nothing's earmarked towards them. And when I've asked my boss, he said, well, call GE and see if they'll sponsor. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure the CEO of GE isn't picking up my phone call today. So it's there's always an iron in the fire, always something to keep going. And I'm trying to get back into doing some VR stuff with NVRT Labs. Actually working as a co-chair on a standard right now for AMI. We're trying to develop an education standard, and so we're a couple of years out. Obviously, it's a long process, but we want to find a way to make sure that every biomed program is putting out quality people, and around the same level. It's a real passion of mine that we get this next generation. When I was at Blood Services, I controlled 100% of Canada's blood flow when it came to equipment, and I really love that stress and I love that pride. But now my pride is, I want to see my students become that next CEO of GE. I want to see them at the AMI exchanges, working for these companies, running their own companies. So it's, I'd say that's where I'm at now. I'm always working, always doing something, but it's never ending. I think if it was ending, if I didn't have all these things on the go, I'd be bored and I'd probably move into something else. I think you've got to be passionate when you're an educator. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
Absolutely. And I like the goals you're setting, man. You're setting goals that's not something that you're doing right now, And I tell people all the time, if your goal is something that requires what you're doing today, then it's not really a goal. You got to set something that's not happening. And that makes that goal attainable because it has a purpose. And when you have a larger purpose, that will push you further to make sure that purpose comes to fruition.
Well, some of it goes to my martial art training, where I remember I started, and I was probably 36 when I started martial arts. And I remember thinking to myself, what am I doing? This is hard work. And I was reading some quotes and doing some reading, and I came across this one. I'm sorry, I forget who said it, but they said, time is going to pass. The years are going to go by. Wouldn't it be really cool if at the end of it you had a black belt? And it's the same for everything. This stuff takes years. It's going to take me years to be a doctor. It's going to take me years to open my biomed company. Start taking the small steps now, because that time is going to go by.
Absolutely.
And 10 years from now, you can either sit and watch some TV and not do it and go, I wish I would have. Or you can take a couple minutes every day to build towards that goal, and you're going to attain it because you've put in that time and sweat equity. So I think that's sort of my thing is, I have to always have something, because if I'm standing still, I'm just going to get passed by. I'm just wasting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if your circle is standing still, you need to get you a new circle. Because
100%. We've all had that circle, right? I told my kids the other day, they were having some friend problems. And I said, look, in high school, I had hundreds of friends, right? Now my circle is considerably smaller. My close friends are probably, 2 to 3 people. I said, because, you got to be around like-minded people. And what did I saw the other day? You should strive to be the dumbest person in the room when it comes to your friends, because they will bring you up to their level.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes,
Never.
Sir.
There's nothing good about being the smartest person in the room.
Yes.
You got to keep learning.
Yes, sir. Now, I appreciate you joining me, James, but I always ask each guest if you can share some words of wisdom for the HTM industry, for the young at heart, young in the industry, the ones been in it for a long time. Share some encouraging words you will tell them to sort of keep them motivated to continue to do what we do. Because sometimes we do run into brick walls, but what advice or encouragement can you share with the industry?
And I give advice all the time to my students, to the point I think they stop listening. I'm going to harp on something that we already touched on, and that's what separates us from everyone else. What makes us, an amazing industry is that from day one, every day you go to work, you are helping someone. You are allowing someone to get one last hug with their grandparents or meet their baby girl for the first time. You are a part of that. Whether you see it or not, you are. And that is something you do from the day you graduate till the day you retire. And so I think it's really important that we know that's part of the package, right? When you get that offer package for a job, you see, I'm going to make X money with Y vacation days and Z pension. Cool. What's not mentioned there is that community is going to be better because of you. Your family is going to receive better care because of you. And I think we always need to keep that in the back of our mind, because that's why we do this. And that's what separates us, is we may not be the rock star, right? I'll steal this from an Amy HTM in a Box thing where they compared us to roadies. If you go to a concert, everyone looks at the rock star, right? Which would be the nurses or the doctors. But without the roadies there preparing the gear, there's nothing. And that's us. So yes, the doctors and nurses are rock stars, but without us, they can't do their job. So my words of encouragement would be to just walk around a hospital and realize the impact you have from your very first day. So if you ever lose your passion, look at the face of someone who's going through chemo, or who just had their daughter, or just had a son, or is getting that last hug. And that will fill you with more motivation than you need to get through that day.
Yes, sir. Well said, man. I appreciate you, James. Look forward to seeing you soon. And anytime you want to come back on here, man, maybe you could bring some of your students. We can have a little round table with the kids. You're welcome.
Well, they'll be reaching out when it comes to asking about a day in life.
There you go, man. You give them my phone number. I'll help you out. All right, bro.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
No problem.